It was a long drive from Headland, Alabama, back to Augusta, Georgia. That morning, a light rain fell from the overcast sky, and every color seemed to have a muted, muddy tone. But as I drove back, I thought about the reason I had made this trip. It was to meet Mr. Joe Todd, and to learn about a man who at nearly 80 years old was making cane syrup the way his family had done since 1835.
I have my grandfather's cane stripper. I remember asking my dad when maybe I was 10 or 12, I said, how long has our family been making syrup? And he thought for a while, and he says, well, you know, it goes back to the 1830s, but he said, I could tell you the actual story of what my dad said, because I asked him the same question. Dad, how long have you been making syrup? And my granddaddy told him, said, this cane stripper his grandfather made for him, and his grandfather were stripping cane in the fall of 1864 when his dad, Eli Todd, walked home from the Civil War of the Battle of Atlanta. Daddy said Grandpa looked up, him and his granddaddy were stripping cane, and Daddy showed me the cane stripper that he made, and it's hanging on the wall here. It's a very treasure of mine. That's my granddaddy's cane stripper that his granddaddy made for him. They were stripping cane in October of 1864 when he looked up and saw his daddy walking home from the Civil War. Now, Grandpa said, I'm ashamed to admit it, but he said, my thoughts was not, I'm thankful that my daddy survived the war and is now home. He said, all I thought about was I won't be hungry anymore. But in October of 1864, my grandfather, my great-grandfather, and my great-great-grandfather made syrup here in the adjoining county of where we are today. So we have also, through other sources, we believe our family originally started making syrup here in southeast Alabama, southwest Georgia in 1835. Skimming, we got about 3 gallons of chlorophyll out. But there's still about another gallon in there to get perfect syrup, to get that. We've got to get 100% of the chlorophyll out to have perfect syrup. My first remembrance of Dad making the syrup and the sugar cane, we all wore hand-me-downs. The 2 brothers of mine was older than I was. By the time they got to me, they were in pretty bad shape. And I can remember wearing a pair of overalls, and I was no more than 3. I could have probably been 4 years old, and Dad was making syrup. And I remember the back of my pants were torn, the overalls was torn. And I wasn't embarrassed about it, but I remember 2 men driving up in a big fine car, and they had on suits of clothes and nice suits of clothes. They didn't have on overalls like everybody else wore. They had on hats. They were really dressed up. Well, I knew these men were very important. And then it became embarrassing to me that I had on overalls with the back end torn out of them. So I started backing up to the house to where they wouldn't see me. And you saw the chlorophyll that comes out of the cane, that skimmings that comes off. Well, I didn't see that tub of skimmings, and I backed into that tub of skimmings, and I remember, you know, how sticky it was and how it got all over me and ruined my clothes, and I remember jumping up crying and going to Mama. Now, Mom was a disciplinarian. I don't remember Dad ever much attacking us, but with Mom, we were all deathly afraid of her. She was a perfectionist. She could can and make the most wonderful meals out of anything. She was a super good cook. She could make the best biscuits, cornbread, collards, turnips. Mom was a master provider. but she was a highly demanding person of us three boys. And she made life hard for us, but it really taught us a lot. She was the one that taught us all that we needed to know how to cook. We needed to know how to preserve and can. I won't forget the time that the health inspector came, and he told my wife, and we've been canning stuff for years, and he told my wife she needed to know how to go to canning school. Well, I doubt that young man knows anything about canning, but my wife knows everything about canning. But yeah, we're gonna have to go to canning school to satisfy our health inspector. But we were taught well by our parents to know how to dress a chicken, dress a hog, shell an ear of corn, where to take our corn to have meal made. We cherish the fact that we grew up on the farm, and we knew the hard things that we had to do to survive and to make a living. Well, I've got some photographs of planting cane here on this place. We planted cane Labor Day of 2012. But you plant that cane using the stalk of cane. You don't use a seed, because each leaf, it has a little nodule or an eye, and that's where the root forms, and that comes up and makes another stalk of cane. So you open a ditch or a furrow in the ground, and you plant the whole stalk of cane. And ideally you want to plant in September, and it will root all the warm days during the wintertime, and in the spring it will come out early and get a good start. The newer varieties, all it needs is a 5-month growth period, but all your old heritage varieties, it needs at least 7 months to sweeten up. But this has been a good year for us. But I can remember the old folks' way was to dig a hole in the ground and put those stalks in it and cover it in the fall of the year. Whatever that we made into syrup for enough to last us, the rest of it we buried, and we would dig it out in the spring and plow open the fur, and we would chop it up, and we would drop those pieces of the stalk in the ground and cover it up. But I've learned over time that really is Stone Age. We don't need to do that. We need to go ahead and cut that stalk down when it's good and green in September and plant the whole stalk. We get a much better germination, we get a much better stand, and then we'll get an extra couple of feet of growth the next year by planting it in the fall of the year. The leaf of the cane comes out from the stalk, and wherever there's a leaf right behind it is a joint and that little nodule. All right, for that little nodule to be healthy, water has to stay against it. So water is always between the leaf and the stalk, and it will be a perfect environment for little gnats, for little mosquitoes to have water. All right, well, that will draw spiders, and spiders will draw this, and frogs, and the little green tree frogs. So when you go out in the fall of the year, you'll find all of this ecology, going on in your cane fields. So you take the leaf off of the stalk of cane to get rid of the insects. So you take the leaf off of the stalk of the cane, you cut the top out, and then you cut it off as close to the ground as you can, and you load it and you bring it to the mill. The mill crushes the juice out of the stalk of cane. And now we use the crushed stalk to compost, to use it for fertilizer here on our farm. But it can be used for other things. It can be ground up into cattle feed, it can be ground up and put in chicken feed. Sugar mills sell it to make Silatex out of for your commercial buildings. So there's multiple things. You can actually make a form of paper out of that stalk of cane. Now, when I first started making syrup in '97, it would take me about 2.5 hours with the mill that I had to grind 80 gallons of juice. So we have been able to find better mills and to upgrade and to get our timing going. And this morning, to grind the 60 gallons of juice on a mill that was made in, say, about 1925, it took less than 30 minutes to grind that 60 gallons of juice. And it went into a stainless steel tank. We pumped it into the kettle, and it takes about 3.5 hours to cook the impurities out of it. The sugar cane is a member of the grass family. The first ingredient that comes out of it is chlorophyll, and it comes out in a thick mass. I don't start skimming that off until it almost reaches the boiling point, because what will happen, all of your little grunges, dirts, or grains of sand will come up and mat into that chlorophyll. And just before boiling, I skim that off of it. And when it begins to boil, we continue to skim. But the one thing that we're very, very careful about is to increase the amount of flame under the kettle and keep that thing boiling up to the top of the pot. Because keeping the wind from knocking it down, keeping the kettle full, getting the chlorophyll out of it, those are key things to having bright, pretty, good tasting syrup. If you leave the chlorophyll in the cane syrup, it will give it a strong, bitter bite taste to it. Like if you swallow it, you'll taste that grunginess on the back of your tongue. But we try to make sure that our cane syrup is all clear of chlorophyll, and we know how to do that. We know how to control it and bring that right out on that rim of the kettle and wipe it off after we're no longer able to skim. See, you're not able to skim all of the chlorophyll out of syrup. You have to be able to bring it out on that lip and then take a rag and wipe it off. And I think today you had some footage of me wiping the lip of that kettle. So you're doing two things to that kettle. You're bringing that chlorophyll out there, you're wiping it off, and you're also keeping it from scorching. Down in the kettle, that syrup is not going to scorch. But out on that rim, when you bring it out, if you don't get it off within 3 or 4 minutes, it will scorch. And that will in turn then get back into your syrup, just like trying to cook a potato that sticks to the bottom of the pot. And it will have that scorch taste throughout it. And that's why a lot of people's syrup will taste scorched, is because they don't keep it clean around the rim or the lip of the kettle. So that's basically what we try to do, is get the chlorophyll out of it. And then once we get the chlorophyll out, around 215 degrees. See, you boil water all day long, it'll only get to 212 till your pot runs dry. But cane syrup is not that way. Cane juice is not that way. It boils at 212 here where we're at. But as you get the chlorophyll out of it and you get the water out of it and you start getting the syrup, the temperature will start rising. So around 215 degrees, you've got all of that out of it. You can start cutting your flame down. And then all you're trying to do then is keep it from scorching around the rim. And that's where you get your perfect, good, mild, mellow tasting cane syrup from.
To steal a phrase from a television show of the past, the final syrup is like black gold or Texas tea to me. As our interview concluded, I told Mr. Todd that I couldn't wait to slice open a biscuit and pour some syrup on it.
Oh my goodness, that's a terrible sin. You gotta know a syrup sopping etiquette. You put your butter in your plate, you pour your syrup over it, and you stir it up, and then you start sopping it around the edges with that biscuit. Might not look good, but that's the way you eat it. It's a syrup sopping, and if that syrup's not thick enough to tear that biscuit up, there's something wrong with the syrup maker.
Well, I still make homemade buttermilk biscuit, and in fact, we just had some last week, and that syrup just makes it. It tastes like my daddy's used to taste when I was young, and we like that.
And the other night when we opened some of his syrup and my wife cooked some biscuits that was almost as good as my grandmother's. We opened them up and put butter on it and put syrup on top of it, and I just my childhood memories really came back of the good times we had around the old kitchen table before we had to go out and I would say chop cotton or pick cotton or what have you, but it put a boost to you so that you could get the maximum work, or your father could get the maximum work out of you for a couple hours anyway.
So many people, I'm not sure I want a lot of people to know about this, about Todd syrup, because we like it. You just can't get syrup like he's got in the grocery store. If you read the label or just taste it, you find that it's just water and something else, and it just, that something else is not very good. So I like it. I have memories of my parents, as Felden here does. We'd have the syrup and have the biscuits and have some good bacon. You can't beat that for a good breakfast. So I have good memories. I remember also the cane mills out in the country and how they operated, and of course, as Felden said, they had the mule that pull the grinding device around, and I never did know how that mule did so much work, but he did a whole lot of it. And then you had the boiling pits that were, of course, handmade and either out of metal or brick, and that's the way it was done back in those days. And I won't say every farm had a cane mill, but there were plenty of them scattered around this country down here, and I'm sure all over the South. So it's a great thing for us. It brings back memories and as well as good taste for more. Matter of fact, I'm getting some syrup for my Christmas presents for my children. That's how much I value it.
I laid the brick on my furnace. I designed the mill, the gearbox, the conveyor speed. I put all of that together to time everything perfectly. I came up with the pump to pump the juice over to the kitchen where we're cooking it at, and you know, it's vented perfectly, it draws perfectly, it cooks perfectly. I've got everything down really about as good a scientific art as you can, but it didn't come about overnight. In 1997, 1996 when I bought the farm, the little mini farm that we lived on, I realized that nobody was making syrup. And that was one of the things that was lost, but I knew I could do it, and I knew how to do it. I just didn't have the equipment. So I got the cane and I planted that first year. And I found a gentleman, and he had gotten to the point where he didn't make syrup anymore, but he had the equipment. And so I carried my cane over to Columbia, Alabama, and used his equipment and made the syrup, and he helped me some. And of course, I gave him half of the syrup for making it. So I did 3 cookings that year, and I took a piece of barn tin off of an old barn and wrote on there with a paintbrush, said cane syrup for sale, and drew an arrow a half a mile, nailed it up down on the highway. And in 3 days, all 3 cookings was gone. We didn't have any. Well, I had a little bit of cane left, so I went back and planted a little bit more, because all I wanted to do was to grow us some syrup, grow our neighbors some syrup. But it just kind of sort of exploded because nobody was doing it. And other people came, and I taught and trained them how to make syrup. I kept expanding. I made the statement earlier, about 6 years, I grew all my cane with just a little walk-behind rototiller like you use in a garden. And so then I bought the tractor, and we got bigger, and we always put all of our money back into it. And I think it was 2002, our business had reached a point that I felt like that it would be profitable for my wife to quit work and join with us. Basically, we're just a farm couple that works hard and produces what we produce. And she is a real champion to put the hours in, as well as to be a wife and be a grandmother and so forth, to be a part of this business. And as I say, our goal is to retire and turn this over to the children, but right now it's just us. My generation is passing away, and the way to do a lot of things, not many women today know how to cut up a chicken. They don't know how to dress a chicken. They don't know how men don't know how to kill hogs and dress them and smoke hams and so forth. So to be able to preserve a part of the farm life of growing the stalk of sugarcane and putting it in a jar for people to enjoy is a story that I'm so grateful to you for coming and visiting us and telling this story for people to enjoy. And I know that you're going to be successful with this, and I know it's going to be a hit with people worldwide.